Hello, welcome to Tea with Mali. We're here today with Patricia Loria. She is the marketing manager for Mines Advisory Group, otherwise known as MAG America. And she's going to share a little bit about her journey to working with MAG and also what inspired her to choose this particular topic to work in as a career. So tell us a little bit about MAG.
So Mines Advisory Group has been around for 24 years. Next year is our 25th anniversary. And we are headquartered in the UK, in Manchester, but we also have an office in Washington, D.C., which is where I work. That office has 6 full-time staff and a lot of other volunteers and supporters. Okay. And what we do is we work to remove landmines and unexploded bombs in countries recovering from conflict. And some of those conflicts are recent. We went into Libya as soon as Gaddafi fell to try to secure some of the arms there, which really posed a security threat to people and the region. Lebanon, right after their war with Israel in 2005, there was a huge amount of cluster munitions there. We were in there immediately. So we are an emergency response team, but we also sadly have to go back to places that have been littered with either bombs or landmines for decades. A lot of the work we do is in Southeast Asia, where Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia all suffered extensively from U.S. bombing campaigns, as well as other internal conflicts that laid, for the most part, the landmines in those countries. And for the people in those countries, these items are just as dangerous as the day they were dropped and are responsible for countless deaths and injuries. But even more so, they really cripple these countries. People can't farm. They're afraid to send their children to school. And as an American, it's really hard for, I think, us to understand that fear. I've had the privilege of traveling to these countries and seen some of it more close hand, but it really is just heartbreaking that there are people in the world who are suffering like this from a problem that's really man-made.
Wow. You're so passionate when you talk about this, and we're going to go into really why this is so important to you personally, but what led you here to become the marketing manager of MAG? How did you find them, or did they find you?
It was a long path. So, when I was in college, I studied abroad in Russia. I was always very interested in foreign affairs and really developing countries, even though Russia at that time was still the Soviet Union. So it was considered first world, but it wasn't really first world if you ever spent any time traveling in Russia. And I really got a passion for being places both on the beaten track and off the beaten track. I will travel to any country and find joy and beauty in it. So right out of college, I actually worked for a nonprofit that worked in the former Soviet Union. It taught entrepreneurs how to start up businesses and politicians how to run kind of democratic campaigns. And then I actually got into business in Russia. I worked for Western Union for a while, and that just started me down this business path. And I worked for MasterCard and United Healthcare, so did a lot of banking and insurance banking. And, it was one of those things, my life path roads, and I don't regret any of it, but just went a very different direction. I was very successful financially. I still did a lot of international travel, mostly to Europe, which I loved. But by the time I had reached just about 40, I just had a little mini breakdown, isn't probably the right word, because I have a super loving and supportive family. But I just couldn't see keeping on going down this path anymore. I had made a good amount of money and my family had gotten used to that lifestyle. But I really knew that there must be something different for me to do. And you talk about following your passions. I mean, one of my strongest passions has always been the travel. And when I'm traveling, it's really about getting to know people. So I've always been concerned and connected with people around the world. And while I love this country, there's so many people who say they're an American first. I don't know that I'm an American first. I think I'm just a human being first. And again, I am proud of this country in so many ways. I think it's a role model for so many things. But I think people all around the world deserve the freedoms we have. They deserve, you know, every parent everywhere deserves the right for their children to be safe. And so I really wanted to find just a different opportunity that allowed me to be that global citizen that I knew was so much a part of who I was. And so I just started looking for jobs and found MAG. And so it was kind of serendipitous. They needed someone and I needed MAG. So.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think that, you know, a lot of people who might be watching or in the world, we go through what we call routines in life, through our careers, through expectations of what society might want for us. Our education track kind of leads us down this path. And we get further and further away from the things that fulfill us and make us happy. And sometimes even way back when we were a child was the last time we actually felt free. I mean, at least that is for my case, you know, and that's why I decided to do what I'm doing now. But for you, it was wonderful that even though you call it a mini breakdown, it was more, I think, more about knowing that you got to a place in your life where you could have achieved anything already, financially you had it all, but you got to a place of where significance. You needed that to feel significant in the world. And that's powerful. And a lot of people get there, but they don't change the routine because it's safe.
Yes.
Lifestyle. Was that scary for you? I mean, you talked about your family having all of that, and now you had to change. You know, how was their reaction once you said, you know, I'm not happy, I'm going to go find something that makes me happy, I'm going to go change the world. We might be impacted, you know, financially.
Well, I would say first, to your point, you know, one of the reasons it is hard to change is you get so much validation. You know, I would get promotions. So while I knew I wasn't satisfied, I was having all these people telling me, you're doing a great job. Here, have a new title, have another month, you know, have more money. You know, I had people who pulled me to other jobs, so there was this amount of change. But yes, to your point, it's you always know there's something missing, and so it's hard to get out of this trap of success in a way. You know, I would say first and foremost, you know, it was my husband who obviously, you know, needed to look at kind of all the considerations we have, you know. This is where we live. This is what I know. Kind of, these are pieces of our lifestyle we can change, pieces of our lifestyle that we might not be able to change. This is what he might be able to do differently in his job. So, I mean, he was always the most practical one. And even, you know, in the beginning, when I first went on this interview, I was like, well, I don't know if I'm going to get it, so let's not worry about it. And he, you know, and he was just like, of course you're going to get it. Like, why? Who wouldn't hire you? That doesn't make any sense at all. So, you know, while I was still just letting the process move, he was always the pragmatist, being, you know, already calculating the numbers as my first interviews went on. So I owe so much to his support and really trying to let me live my dreams. You know, I would say for the kids, it's so much easier. So I have two daughters, one who's 16 and one who's 7, and they have just been my biggest supporters. And it makes me just tear up to think about it. I mean, there have been so many times when they have told me how proud they are of what they're doing, that, you know, I've changed, especially for my 16-year-old who kind of has seen more of the experience, how she sees me as so much happier. She sees me as someone who's kind of following her purpose, and how it's changing her view of what her future is going to be. And, you know, there are even things, you know, now that we're looking at colleges, you know, what college can we afford with my changed job? And she'll tell me that is not your problem. You're not going to change anything differently. We'll figure it out because what you're doing is important and it makes you happy, and everything else will kind of work out. So I have been, my whole family has been extremely powerful. And I think, you know, both my daughters have, I think it can't help but change them, right? I mean, not to say, you know, I think anyone, as long as they're happy with their choice, that's great. But I mean, they have this mother who travels off to Vietnam, and they see me in pictures. Well, Vietnam is probably the nicest place, the safest place that I've traveled. You know, they see me in Angola in this tent in the middle of nowhere, and, you know, it causes them some stress. But they look at me and say, yes, that's my mom. She's over 40. She's a woman. She is in Angola. They're proud of that.
So what is your role with MAG America as a marketing manager? You talked about the personal emotion and, you know, having to travel, but there's so many elements to the work that you do at MAG. So can you share more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, probably of the people listening, I would imagine a large percentage do not know that this problem exists. And so that is essentially why I was brought on, to generate awareness of this issue. And then hopefully get people to care enough to act. One of our obvious goals is to get people to act and give us money.
Right.
But there's so many kind of steps before that money stage. It's getting people engaged, using them to spread the word for us, so that we increase the people who know about this. I mean, you know, in some ways I'd rather have one person who can help me educate 1,000 rather than that one person just give me a check and walk away.
Right.
Because I need to educate the 1,000. And it's our supporters, people like yourself, who help us do that. So, you know, when I came in, you know, we had the challenge that we are a small organization with a small budget. International issues are generally less kind of popular than domestic issues. People are more comfortable with hearing and giving to things they can understand. So the soup kitchen down the street, a program at their church, because those are all things that they can see and feel and become more connected to. The amount of people who can see that broader global picture and care is more limited. One of the elements that we look for in terms of kind of who are our targets generally are people who have either chosen that international experience or have it innate in them. And so there are some, like immigrants, who have it innate in them. They may have been from a country that it was affected, or just by nature of the fact that they grew up with as an immigrant in this country, everything about the way they were brought up, their culture, etc., tends to be more open to what might be going on in the world around them. So there's that group. There are world travelers. So there are a bunch of people, and they're not always that wealthy, but who just got the bug.
Right.
You know, and I feel a very common thread to them because it's kind of a little bit of who I am. And who just love to see places. You know, I remember when I went to Angola, you know, I said something, and my father's like, Angola? And I was like, it was beautiful. The people were interesting. And it astonished him. He's like, but you've been to so many amazing places. How could you still say you liked Angola? And I'm like, because I know that I don't rank things the way other people rank them. I just honor every experience as it is and try not to compare. I mean, comparing Angola with Paris.
Right. It's very different.
Right,
it's apples to oranges.
Right. There's no point. You can love every experience for what it is. So those people, there are these category of world travelers who tend to kind of get madly interested. A lot of veterans. And people, kind of the baby boomers who grew up during the Vietnam War, and a lot of them maybe protested or had friends who fought and came back and maybe questioned some of what had happened there. I mean, I'm not sure that there are many Americans who look back at that, who lived through it, who don't see that as a total gray area, right? It certainly wasn't a black and white war, which is why, you know, so many veterans came back and had challenges with it. And not to say, I mean, we never tend to judge what happened, but you can't look back at that situation without saying America has some legacy and responsibility there to address with the cleanup and address with the fact that people are still living with these bombs. So, you know, as a marketing manager, I look at all these people. I look at all these people who are probably our targets and try to figure out how to best give them our information while competing with so many sources, right? I mean, these people are looking at things online, they're looking at other nonprofits, they're reading magazines, and everyone's head is exploding with information. So how do I get through to them and compete with organizations? We say compete, we don't really mean it in a way, but we mean it in a way.
Yeah.
Like World Vision, CARE, all of those organizations do great work. They all have a much bigger brand than MAG does. They're all working in developing countries. A lot of times we're working alongside of them. We're partnering with them to clear land and do development. But how do we make sure people want to give to us so that we can do more work? So one of the things that we did early on was starting our film series. And so a lot of people use videos. And originally I was, this was a much different experience for me than my banking work had been. So I was kind of going into it saying, I'll do something similar to what everyone does, these short videos, hopefully I can make it go viral, etc. But I happened to find a great company, Media Storm. I met a couple wonderful filmmakers, Nathan Golan and Rick Gershon. And what they convinced me and we worked towards is these are complex issues with complex stories. What we really need to do is make a longer piece that profiles people affected by this and gives a sense of, and our first film was on Laos, which is how we got to know each other, gives a sense of what is this beautiful country like. So it helps let everyone in some way be that world traveler who's so near and dear to my heart. So they can see this beautiful country, what people's lives are like there, how warm and generous the Lao people are, but then what is this tragedy that's kind of continuing to affect them. So we've done a couple of these films, and they're very unique in the industry. When we first did them, I think the folks even over in MAG UK was like, what's that new marketing manager in America doing? This isn't how we do things. This isn't how anybody does things. But they've really become kind of a corner piece. And for people who like us and who support us, once they see the film, they're hooked, right? This is their cause for life.
Absolutely.
Because I've really made it so real for them, much more than a case study or kind of words on a paper can do. But we do put words on the paper. So other things we do is take a lot of pictures, write a lot of case studies, so you can really get the stories of both the victims, because people a lot of times need to hear those victim stories, because that's what's going to pull at their heartstrings. But then you also need to give them the hope that we can clear this land, and this child who may have been a victim in another path, another lifetime, doesn't have to be. Instead, their parents could start farming their land. They can have enough money to send their child to school. Their child could, decide to become a teacher or a nurse or a doctor. We can make that, we could totally change that child's life. And it starts by getting these items out of the ground.
Well, I had such a great experience too when I first met you and MAG got introduced. It was through the Lao film Surviving the Peace. And because I came from Laos and the Vietnam War, the impact of that and the conflict inside of Laos really shifted the life of my family, and we came to America as refugees of war based on that. And that was over 40 years ago. And so just when I watched that movie, I was just shocked and astonished, even though I knew the visual was just so powerful. I cried throughout the whole thing, and I was like, I'm convinced I have to somehow support MAG and get the word out there. And it wasn't just because I was from the country of Laos. I can only imagine that there's so many countries in the world who are still dealing with things that have happened decades and decades ago, and these innocent lives are being impacted, having nothing to do with any political stance at the time at all. They're just trying to live, trying to survive. Yeah, so it's amazing what you're doing.
There's another prominent Laotian in the DC area, Dr. Kayasith, and he's an older gentleman in his 80s. And he told me when he saw the film, for him it was like getting his history back. He's lived in America around that same amount of time, 40 years, and every once in a while he'll ask kids in school, so what are you learning about Laos and the Vietnam War? And no one ever learns that Laos was so heavily bombed. He'll look for information on the internet and not find things. And he'll tell people, I was there, this is what is happening. And people will say, no, you're crazy. So it's like, finally I had this film in my hand that says, I'm not crazy. This is what happened to my country. And, we've talked about this before. I talk about all these people who are kind of constantly in my head advising me. Immigrants in the U.S. are one of those people, giving them back their history in a way and acknowledging that as Americans, I think is an important part of what we do.
Patricia, what do you believe your legacy is? When you're no longer here, what do you want to leave behind as what you stood for?
So the fact that I'm a mother is so important to me, and what I teach my daughters. And so hopefully, that lesson can kind of be imparted on a broader basis. But, I tend to kind of think local just to my family. And that's to fight for something. I'm not sure that my daughters will take the same path. They might not feel this kind of international bug that I have felt. But what I won't accept is essentially not caring and just following the path of least resistance. It's, we're lucky enough to be in America. My children have been given so many gifts. I essentially demand that they find a way to give back. And I will hound that into their head for as long as kind of they talk to me. And you have to find your own path. Right. You have to find your own purpose. My purpose isn't their purpose. But the one thing that I know is true is that people have to keep helping each other out. I mean, that's humanity, right? Once we stop caring about others, we stop trying to help each other. Then it kind of feels like all is lost. But I don't think we're there yet by a long shot. Right now we have a lot of summer volunteers in the office and interns, and they kind of keep me going, and I tell them kind of the same thing. It's so amazing what you're doing, and candidly, you need to do more of it. It's a lot of work, and everyone has different things they could be doing with their time, but there are so many problems that are solvable if people just get up and act and do a small thing, every day, or a small thing every week to make a difference, and kind of money, in fundraising, we throw out so much time, like, just give that one cup of coffee and give that $5 to your cause. I think that everyone needs to ingrain that a little bit more in their soul in order for us to make this world a better place for everybody. I just think that's kind of what we have to do, and I don't know how it kind of got so ingrained in me, but it's really a fundamental belief, and I'm going to push that on everyone I know, probably until the day I die. And I probably lost it a little bit for a while, but once you found it, there's kind of no looking back.